It's apparent that the US President Donald Trump's resolve to take over Gaza is going nowhere. Palestinians are against it, so is Hamas, and so are neighbors and Arab nations. So, what happens next? Do Israel resume its carpet bombing on Gaza? Does it wage a war against its neighbors? Or are we closer to a two-state solution than we think? Welcome to yet another edition of Wise Heads. I'm your host, Ashish Shukla. We all know that the US President Donald Trump has resolved or floated the idea of taking over Gaza and turn it into a kind of Riviera of Middle East. He was adamant that the neighboring Egypt and Jordan would absorb over 1 million of displaced Gazan Palestinians because, as he said, we do a lot for them. Even as both Egypt and Jordan said no, Trump believed they would eventually capitulate, as Panama and Colombia have done elsewhere. Israel's evil of a Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, proposed that Saudi Arabia has too big a land and they could easily create a Palestinian state within its fold. However, all these neighboring nations are dead against moving the Palestinians within their territory. Some of Trump's words were not funny at all. He said Gaza hasn't worked out for decades. He should perhaps reflect who is to be blamed for it. He said we should learn from history. It is Trump who needs to learn from history that Israel's military solutions have not worked. They want Hamas not to have any role after the ceasefire ends, but who the hell is Israel and the US to demand so? It is for the Palestinians to decide if they want Hamas or not. Let's see what's been the stance of the neighboring nations. Egypt survives on the US financial aid of around $3.6 billion a year. Without this aid, be able to pay its army the salary. But its stance has been unequivocal from day one that we are not taking in the Palestinians. The reason is if any Palestinian attack was to happen in Israel from the Egyptian territory, it would be an excuse for Israel to invade Egypt. Besides, by accepting the Palestinians, Egypt would earn the hostility of its own people and the entire Arab world for having a hand in ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. Jordan was more vehement. It said if Israel forcibly evicted Palestinians on its land, it would be an act of war to which Jordan would adequately respond. This is also apparent for Jordan too survives out on the US support. But like Egypt, going with Trump's plan would be a sure end of the existing regime. But the most remarkable hostile reaction came from Saudi Arabia of all people, having considered they have been long considered inseparable from the United States. It said, we will not normalize with Israel until there is a separate Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. And what about Hamas and the Palestinians? How have they taken to Trump's proposal? This is what Hamas has said. Our people in the Gaza will not allow these plans to pass. What is required is an end of occupation and aggression against our people, not their expulsion from their land. Our people in Gaza have thwarted displacement and deportation plans under bombardment for more than 15 months. They are rooted in their land and will not accept any scheme aimed at uprooting them from their homeland. And what do the Palestinians think? These remarkable people began trekking from south to north Gaza the day ceasefire came into effect on January 19th. Over 1 million people returning to the land which has only rubble, dead bodies of the beloved, and countless unexploded bombs. A place which has no water, food, hygiene, drainage, or roof. Forget the luxuries of hospitals and schools. Doesn't it tell us about that they would rather die then leave their homeland. That after 16 months of genocide, they still want their land, their Palestine. Now the ball is in Israel and in the US court. What do they do next? One can't see how the United States would force Palestinians to leave Gaza. Where do they go if you expel them on gunpoint? Even if the Palestinians are willing to leave, who is going to accept them? Who would represent them? Hamas, it would be, whom you treat as your sworn enemy. Do you think Hamas would actually settle on Israel and the US terms after suffering for 16 months? And now let's turn to Israel. One would like to believe that Israel-Hamas ceasefire would be honored for its duration, which began on January 19 and ends on March 2nd. After 6 weeks of three phases of ceasefire, Israel now either resumes bombing or let things cool and takes its own shape. If Israel resumes bombing, it would be much to dislike of Donald Trump. That's the reason he proposed the Gaza beautification project. Trump doesn't want war. So if Israel resumes bombing, it would not be to Trump's liking. He also was the initiator of the Abraham Accords. These accords foresaw a recognition of Israel by the Gulf monarchies, a closer cooperation, a win-win deal for Israel and US, as many trade routes and arteries could thus emerge which would link the Middle East with Africa, Asia and Europe. It would also considerably weaken Iran and Turkey, two nations who are an existential threat to Israel. But what happens to Israel if it allows Palestinians to remain in Gaza from now on? Never mind the rubble it has been reduced to. It would cause an upheaval in Israel where 97% of its people want Gaza to be cleaned out of Palestinians. They would ask, what did we gain after 16 months if Palestinians were to remain in Gaza? What about the hostages we lost and who suffered? What about our armed forces who lost men and are now dispirited? What about our economy, which is in ruins? And what about North Israel, which has now become a barren land because of constant shelling by Hezbollah from neighboring Lebanon? And who is to guarantee that the Palestinians would remain quiet after what Israel did to them? What does it tell you? It tells you that nobody is in charge, nobody could do a thing. Israel and the US can't push the Palestinians out of Gaza. Palestinians and Hamas can't force a two-state solution. Nobody in the Arab world could side with Israel and survive, and nobody could help the Palestinians by absorbing them within their fold, which would be seen by their own people as an act of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. And as far the good forces of the world is concerned, most of humanity is seething in anger against Israel and the US. We see almost complete opposition to them by the word in United Nations on Gaza. But they can't stop Israel or the US, even Russia and China, which are formidable forces. They can't project their power in the Middle East like the US is able to do with its numerous military bases in the region. So that is what it is coming to. There is no hope. The only solace is there would be a lull in attack on Gaza for the time being. Things would move much furiously before the ceasefire ends on March 2nd. My feeling is the decisive move would still come from Donald Trump. If he retracts from the Gaza beautification proposal, he either lets Israel get on with its genocide project or rebuild Gaza while the Palestinians stay within Gaza, moving from one part to other. There would be no shortage for their redemption from the neighboring Gulf monarchies or elsewhere. How Israel reacts would be another matter. It's completely within Trump's grasp to make Israel do what it wants them to do. If Benjamin Netanyahu goes, so be it. That's the only option Trump is left with. Otherwise, his desire to be seen as a peacemaker in the Middle East would actually turn out to be a legacy as a man who launched countless wars in the Middle East, which in the end would destroy Israel and leave the United States with only enemies. That's all in today's edition of Wise Heads. This is your host, Ashish Shukla, who now takes your leave. I say goodbye and best of luck.